So how are Ford engines different from Chevy small blocks, or how are Chevy small blocks different from what Chrysler and Dodge were doing with their V8 engines? So you sort of have to start with the beginning of the three big companies. Now, before all the pushrod V8 engines came out, you have to think about what each company was doing before that. So Ford, for example, came out with the Ford Flathead, which was a side valve engine, and it was one of the first mass-produced V8 engines for the general public. Cadillac had come out with the first V8 engine, but Ford is the one that made it affordable for everyday Americans. Then World War I and World War II sort of slowed down, the advancement in technology. Most of the companies like Buick were doing an inline 8 variation, as well as Pontiac, and Oldsmobile was also using an inline 8 or a straight 8 engine. Buick called it the Fireball 8. Oldsmobile had their own inline 8, and then Pontiac came out with the Stratostreak, which was their first V8 engine. So it is sort of confusing, is what each company was doing before V8 engines sort of determined what they did with their own pushrod engines. Now, Chevy had the Stovebolt 6, they had the Blue Flame 6, they were doing inline 6 engines. So before their famous small block V8, they were primarily using inline 6 all the way dating back to the Classic 6, which was on the first Chevrolet designed by Louis Chevrolet, which was the pioneer for Chevrolet. Now, what happened after that is Ford came out with their Y block. But because of displacement limitations and some minor oiling issues, they were quickly forced to re-engineer their FE engines and come out with bigger, heavier engines to compete with what General Motors was doing. Now, one thing Chrysler did is they revolutionized cylinder head design with their HEMI design, and it was so powerful that people were scrambling in NASCAR to try to come out with a better engine. That's where Ford developed the SOHC camera. Now, although it was banned from NASCAR and not used, Ford did adopt single overhead cam technology for their future vehicles, like the Ford Pinto engine, the Lima turbo engine, and then eventually the modular engines were all single overhead cam. So what they did or didn't do with their cylinder head design is really where the three companies differ. Chevy did a V6 version of their Chevy small block. So they had essentially a small block V6 engine, where Ford, they came out with smaller displacement turbo 4 cylinders, single overhead cam, and Dodge did similar to what Chevy did. They went with a V6 version of their V8 engine. But as the 90s and 2000s came along, Chrysler and Ford really adopted single overhead cam technology, where Chevy stuck with the pushrod